Captain Marcus Chen stood at attention in the pristine command center of the Galactic Council flagship, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. The massive viewing screen displayed the swirling nebula of Kepler 442, where humanity's newest colony ship had just completed its maiden voyage. Around him, representatives from 12 different species observed with a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed disdain. The humans had been members of the Galactic Council for only 3 standard years, ever since their first faster-than-light vessel had stumbled into Vegan space while fleeing a dying Earth. Most species had taken centuries to develop such technology. Humanity had done it in mere decades, born from desperation and what they called human ingenuity. Deathworlders, whispered the insectoid Keth representative, its mandibles clicking disapprovingly. They shouldn't have been allowed beyond their toxic planet. Marcus pretended not to hear, though his jaw tightened slightly. Earth was indeed classified as a Class 12 death world, one of the most hostile planets known to support intelligent life. Gravity nearly twice the galactic standard, weather patterns that could kill most species in minutes, predators that hunted in organized packs, and an atmosphere so corrosive that it literally rusted metal. Most council members needed environmental suits just to visit Earth's orbital stations. Commander HFY of the Hegemony Empire approached, his scaled purple hide gleaming under the artificial lights. Standing nearly 8 feet tall with 4 arms and bioluminescent patches that pulsed with his emotions, he was an imposing figure even by galactic standards. The Hegemony controlled over 300 star systems and commanded the largest military fleet in known space. Human. HFY's translator rendered his words with mechanical precision, though his tone carried obvious condescension. Your species continues to expand without proper authorization. The Council has not approved settlement of Kepler 442. Marcus turned slowly, his brown eyes meeting the alien commander's burning yellow gaze. With respect, Commander, we filed the proper documentation 6 months ago. The delay in approval doesn't halt our scheduled expansions. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. Humans had a reputation for being direct in their communications. Most species preferred elaborate diplomatic protocols and layers of bureaucratic courtesy. Humans tended to say exactly what they meant, which many found disturbing. Your documentation is irrelevant. HFY's bioluminescent patches flared brighter, indicating rising anger. The Hegemony has prior claim to that sector. Your colony ship will withdraw immediately, or face the consequences. Marcus remained perfectly still, though those who knew humans well might have noticed the subtle change in his posture. His shoulders squared slightly, his breathing slowed, and his hands moved from behind his back to rest loosely at his sides. These were unconscious preparations that every human made when facing a threat. Commander HFY, Marcus said quietly, Kepler 442 is in unclaimed space according to all galactic charts. Our surveys detected no prior settlements or resource extraction. If the Hegemony has a legitimate claim, we'd be happy to review it through proper channels. The alien commander's 4 arms gestured dismissively. Proper channels? You ignorant Deathworlder. The Hegemony doesn't negotiate with primitives. We take what is ours by right of strength. A murmur rippled through the gathered representatives. Even by galactic standards, HFY was being unusually aggressive. The Hegemony had been expanding aggressively for decades, but they typically maintained at least a facade of diplomatic process. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. On Earth, he'd been a Marine before joining the colonial fleet. He'd seen combat in the resource wars that had ravaged his homeworld before the Exodus began. He recognized the look in HFY's eyes, the body language, the tone. This wasn't negotiation. This was a predator asserting dominance. I understand your position, Marcus replied carefully. However, I must respectfully maintain that humanity has followed all established protocols. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting with the full council to resolve this dispute properly. HFY's bioluminescent patches suddenly flared brilliant white, a sign of rage in his species. In one swift motion, his primary right arm swept across the space between them. The back of his scaled hand connected with Marcus's face with a wet crack that echoed through the suddenly silent command center. The blow sent Marcus stumbling backward, blood streaming from his nose and split lip. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the ship's environmental systems. Every species present understood what had just happened. In galactic diplomatic tradition, striking another being during formal proceedings was not just an insult. It was a declaration of absolute contempt. Marcus slowly straightened, wiping blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. His dark eyes locked onto Zexhi's, and something had changed in them. Where before there had been professional courtesy and careful diplomacy, now there was something else entirely, something that made several representatives instinctively step backward. "Commander," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying an edge that his translator couldn't quite render properly. "You've just made a very serious mistake." Zexhi laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Mistake? I have shown these primitives their place. The hegemony has 600 warships. Your pathetic species has 12 patrol boats and a few colony vessels. What could you possibly do to us?" Marcus touched his bleeding lip again, then looked at the crimson stain on his fingers. When he looked up, his expression was completely calm, which somehow made it more unsettling than anger would have been. "You're right about our fleet size," he said conversationally. 12 ships. About 6,000 people total in our space navy. Earth's population when we left was just over 8 billion souls, and we took everyone we could save. He paused, letting that number sink in. "Do you know what 8 billion desperate people can accomplish when someone threatens the only home they have left?" The Vegan representative's whiskers twitched nervously. They had done extensive research on human history when first contact occurred. The files made for disturbing reading. "You dare threaten the hegemony?" Zexhi snarled, raising all four arms in an intimidating display. "We could glass your pathetic colonies tomorrow." "No," Marcus said quietly. "You couldn't." He gestured to the viewing screen where the colony ship was still visible as a bright speck against the nebula. "See, that's not just a colony ship, Commander. That's the 13th vessel in our fleet, and she's not carrying colonists." The command center fell deadly silent as the implications sank in. The ship was too large to be a simple transport, too heavily built to be a cargo hauler. As realization dawned on the assembled representatives, several began backing toward the exits. "What have you done?" The Keth representative chittered in horror. Marcus smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "We've prepared for exactly this kind of situation. 8 billion humans, Commander. Angry, desperate, innovative humans who've spent their entire lives fighting just to survive another day on the most hostile world in known space." He looked directly at Zexhi. "You really should have accepted our diplomatic offer." 5 seconds. That's how long it had taken for everything to change. 5 seconds from the moment Zexhi's hand made contact with human flesh to the moment when the balance of power in the galaxy shifted forever. The hegemony just didn't know it yet. Admiral Sarah Winchester received the encrypted message while reviewing tactical reports in her quarters aboard the UES Prometheus. The message was brief, consisting of only 3 words and a timestamp. Protocol 7 initiated. The timestamp matched exactly 5 seconds after Captain Chen had begun his diplomatic mission to the Galactic Council. Sarah had hoped this day would never come. Protocol 7 was humanity's final contingency, developed during the darkest days before Earth's evacuation, when they'd first made contact with galactic civilization. Humanity's military strategists had run endless simulations. The conclusion was always the same. In a conventional war, humanity would lose. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded by species that had centuries more experience with interstellar warfare. But humans had never fought conventional wars. "Computer, secure channel to all fleet commanders," Sarah commanded, settling into her command chair. The bridge around her was cramped by galactic standards, designed for human efficiency rather than comfort. Every surface was reinforced, every system redundant. Human ships were built like their creators, tough, adaptable, and incredibly difficult to kill. "Admiral," came the immediate response from Captain Torres aboard the UES Defiance. "We received the Protocol 7 alert. Are we really doing this?" Sarah looked at the tactical display showing human space. 12 ships, scattered across 7 star systems, protecting colonies that housed barely 2 million souls, against the hegemony's 600 warships and countless billions of subjects. The odds were impossible by any rational calculation. Marcus was struck during diplomatic proceedings, she said simply. "Under galactic law, that constitutes a formal declaration of war." "Those bastards," growled Captain Kumar from the UES Retribution. "Orders, Admiral?" "You know the protocol," Sarah replied. "Phase 1 begins immediately. God help us all. Across human space, the evacuation began. It wasn't like the frantic exodus from Earth 3 years earlier. This was methodical, planned, efficient. Every human colony had been designed with rapid evacuation in mind. Prefabricated buildings could be dismantled in hours. Essential equipment was already packaged for transport. Families had practiced these drills countless times. On Kepler 442, Colonial Administrator Dr. Elena Vasquez coordinated the retreat, with the same calm precision she'd once used to organize disaster relief on Earth. All families to transport stations. Priority Alpha items only. You know the drill. The colonists moved without panic. These were people who had survived the collapse of Earth's ecosystem, lived through resource wars, and endured years in cold sleep crossing interstellar space. They had learned that survival depended on following protocol, not on emotional outbursts. "Ma'am," called her aide, Lieutenant Park. "The Prometheus's sister ship is requesting docking clearance." Elena nodded, though her stomach tightened. The ship wasn't there to evacuate colonists. It was there to evacuate what they'd spent 3 years building in the deep mining shafts of Kepler 442's largest moon, the project that only a handful of people knew about, the project that would make the hegemony regret ever hearing the word human. Meanwhile, on board the hegemony flagship, Commander HFY was receiving reports that confused and irritated him. Human colonies across 7 systems were implementing what appeared to be evacuation procedures. His intelligence officers couldn't understand why. "Perhaps they're afraid," suggested Sub-Commander Yithka, his second in command. "The Deathworlders may have realized the futility of opposing us." HFY's bioluminescent patches flickered with satisfaction. "Send word to the fleet. We'll begin with their primary colony at Alpha Centauri. A demonstration will convince them to surrender completely." The Galactic Council's emergency session convened within hours. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the vast circular chamber, their voices creating a cacophony of concern and confusion. The video of HFY striking Captain Chen had already spread throughout known space. Chancellor Voxtam of the Vegan Confederacy called for order. "The situation is unprecedented. Physical violence during diplomatic proceedings violates every treaty we've established." "The hegemony acted within its rights," declared the hegemony's representative, a smaller version of HFY's species named Kroltex. "The humans have been expanding too aggressively. They needed to be reminded of their place." The insectoid Keth representative's mandibles clicked anxiously. "Have any of you actually read the human historical files? Their entire evolution was shaped by conflict. They literally fought their way to the top of their planet's food chain." "Irrelevant," Kroltex dismissed. "One Deathworld species cannot threaten the established galactic order." From her position in the observer's gallery, Ambassador Liu Wei watched the proceedings with growing concern. She was humanity's chief diplomatic representative, and she had helped design Protocol 7. She knew exactly what was about to happen, and she was powerless to stop it. Dr. James Morrison, head of Human Xenobiological Studies, was reviewing the hegemony's physiological data when his emergency communicator chimed. The message was simple: begin analysis phase. James had been preparing for this moment since first contact. While other humans studied galactic technology and culture, he had been tasked with a more specific mission: identifying weaknesses. Every species humanity had encountered, James had cataloged their biology, psychology, technological dependencies, and social structures. The hegemony, for all their military might, had 2 critical vulnerabilities. First, their home planet's ecosystem was based on a delicate balance of symbiotic organisms. Disrupt that balance and their entire biosphere could collapse. Second, their technology relied heavily on quantum entanglement networks for faster-than-light communication. They had backup systems, but they were slower and more vulnerable to interference. James's fingers flew over his computer interface, uploading files to secure servers. Within hours, every human ship would have detailed information about how to cripple the hegemony's infrastructure without firing a single shot. It was biological warfare and electronic warfare combined. The kind of asymmetric strategy that humans had perfected during centuries of conflict on Earth. Back on the Council flagship, Captain Chen was being escorted to a detention cell. His diplomatic immunity should have protected him, but the hegemony had declared him a security threat. 2 hegemony guards flanked him as they walked through the ship's corridors, Your species will pay for your arrogance, one of them growled through his translator. Marcus said nothing, but he was counting steps, memorizing the ship's layout, noting security protocols. On Earth, he'd been taught that a Marine never truly surrenders. Even in captivity, he remained a weapon waiting for the right moment to strike. As they passed a communication station, Marcus heard fragments of reports coming in from hegemony scouts. Human colonies were evacuating. Human ships were moving to unknown positions. Human communication traffic had increased dramatically, using encryption methods that hegemony codebreakers couldn't crack. One word kept appearing in the reports: scattered. The humans were scattering like prey animals fleeing a predator. To the hegemony, this looked like cowardice. Marcus almost smiled. They didn't understand humans at all. When a pack animal scatters, it's not always fleeing. Sometimes it's positioning for an ambush. The cell door closed behind him with a soft hiss. Marcus sat on the simple cot and waited. According to his internal chronometer, it had been exactly 6 hours and 37 minutes since Zexhai had struck him. Phase 1 of Protocol 7 would be complete within the next 18 hours. After that, the hegemony would learn what 8 billion desperate humans could accomplish when someone threatened their new home. The galaxy was about to discover that there's a significant difference between being the apex predator on your homeworld and being the apex predator that evolved on a planet that was actively trying to kill you every single day. The hegemony thought they were dealing with another weak species that could be bullied into submission. They were wrong. Catastrophically wrong. The first indication that something was wrong came 18 hours after Captain Chen's detention. Commander Zexhai was reviewing invasion plans when his communications officer approached with a confused expression. "Sir, we're receiving strange reports from our outer systems. Several monitoring stations have gone offline, but not from attacks. They're reporting equipment failures and biological contamination alerts." Zexhai's bioluminescent patches dimmed with annoyance. "Equipment failures? Our technology doesn't fail. Send repair teams, and that's the problem, sir. The repair teams are also reporting health issues. Respiratory distress, skin irritation, cognitive impairment. The medical officers can't identify the cause." Across the hegemony empire, similar reports were flooding in from dozens of worlds. On Zexhai Prime, the capital world, citizens were beginning to experience what their medical professionals initially diagnosed as a minor allergic reaction. Skin became itchy, eyes watered, breathing became slightly labored, nothing life-threatening but increasingly uncomfortable. Dr. Morrison's biological analysis had been precise. The hegemony's respiratory system was designed for their homeworld's atmosphere, which contained trace amounts of a specific organic compound produced by their symbiotic gut bacteria. Remove or alter that compound and their entire species would experience increasing discomfort and eventually respiratory failure. The delivery method was elegantly simple. Humans had spent 3 years studying galactic trade routes, identifying how goods moved between systems, how atmospheric processors worked, how water treatment facilities operated. They had quietly introduced modified bacterial cultures into dozens of systems. Cultures that would remain dormant until activated by a specific chemical trigger. That trigger had been broadcast on a frequency that only human equipment could receive, hidden in what appeared to be routine diplomatic communications. On Earth's moon, in a facility that officially didn't exist, Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Captain Chen, monitored the progression of their biological warfare campaign. The bacteria weren't designed to kill, despite what the hegemony would undoubtedly assume. They were designed to make life increasingly unpleasant until the hegemony agreed to negotiate. Infection rate is approaching 60% across primary hegemony worlds, reported her assistant. Symptoms are consistent with projections. Should be reaching stage 2 within another 12 hours. Dr. Chen nodded grimly. Stage 2 would bring more severe symptoms: difficulty concentrating, muscle weakness, and most importantly, problems with their bioluminescent communication system. The hegemony relied heavily on visual cues for complex communication. Disrupting that would cripple their military coordination. Meanwhile, the electronic warfare component was proceeding exactly as planned. Lieutenant Commander Jackson Rodriguez was arguably the best hacker humanity had ever produced. He'd cut his teeth breaking corporate security systems during Earth's resource wars, then adapted his skills for interstellar warfare. Their quantum entanglement network is more sophisticated than we initially thought, he reported to Admiral Winchester via encrypted channel, but they made the classic mistake of prioritizing efficiency over security. Once I cracked their primary encryption protocols, the entire network opened up like a flower. Jackson's fingers danced across holographic interfaces as he inserted carefully crafted viruses into the hegemony's communication systems. Not crude destructive programs, but subtle modifications that would introduce tiny delays and occasional errors. A military command might be delayed by 30 seconds, or a status report might contain incorrect numbers, or a targeting system might develop a slight calibration error. Individually, these problems were minor. Collectively, they would degrade the hegemony's military effectiveness by approximately 40%. According to human wargaming simulations, on board the Council flagship, Captain Chen was experiencing his own form of warfare. His guards had been replaced twice in the past day, each set reporting unusual fatigue and concentration problems. The atmospheric processors on hegemony ships were already showing signs of bacterial contamination. Chen had also noticed increased security activity throughout the ship. Emergency meetings were being called. Medical teams were rushing between decks and communications traffic had intensified dramatically. Through his cell's small viewport, he could see hegemony patrol ships moving with unusual urgency. Nervous, he asked his current guard, a younger hegemony soldier whose bioluminescent patches were flickering erratically. "Shut up, Deathworlder," the guard snapped, though his translated voice lacked its usual conviction. "Your pathetic species will be crushed within days." "Probably," Chen agreed conversationally. "But you might want to check your environmental readings. That scratchy feeling in your throat isn't normal, is it?" The guard's patches flared with anger, but Chen noticed him unconsciously rubbing his neck. The biological agents were working faster on shipboard systems where air recycling concentrated the bacterial cultures. Phase 2 of Protocol 7 was now in full effect. Human ships, which had appeared to scatter in panic, had actually moved to pre-planned positions throughout galactic space. They weren't running from the hegemony. They were surrounding them. Captain Torres aboard the UES Defiance monitored hegemony fleet movements from her position near the Altair system. "They're trying to concentrate their forces," she reported during the daily command conference. "Pulling ships back from outer territories to protect core worlds." "Exactly what we predicted," Admiral Winchester replied. "Classic defensive response. They're thinking like conquerors who suddenly realized they might be conquered." "How are our infiltration teams doing?" "Better than expected. The biological contamination is making their security protocols sloppy. We've managed to place monitoring devices on 17 major fleet vessels and 6 orbital stations. The infiltration teams were perhaps humanity's most audacious gambit. While other species relied on massive ships and overwhelming firepower, humans had developed something uniquely terrifying: soldiers who could survive in environments that would kill most galactic life forms. Sergeant Maria Santos was currently hiding in the ventilation system of a hegemony dreadnought, a feat that would have been impossible for any other known species. The ship's environmental controls maintained an atmosphere that was toxic to human lungs, temperatures that would cause hypothermia in minutes, and radiation levels that would be lethal to most galactic citizens. Maria was wearing a lightweight environmental suit that human engineers had designed specifically for hostile infiltration. It recycled her air, regulated her body temperature, and included medical injectors that could keep her functional for up to 72 hours in otherwise lethal conditions. "Target acquired," she whispered into her quantum communicator. Through a maintenance grate, she could see the ship's primary reactor control room. 2 hegemony engineers were working frantically to address what they believed were random system malfunctions. They had no idea that a human was 30 feet away, preparing to make their problems much, much worse. The device Maria carried was smaller than a paperback book, but it contained enough concentrated EMP generators to disable the dreadnought's primary systems for several hours. Not enough to destroy the ship, but enough to leave it dead in space while human forces moved into position. Across hegemony space, similar operations were in progress. Human infiltrators were placing monitoring devices, sabotaging communications equipment, and gathering intelligence that would have taken conventional reconnaissance years to acquire. They moved through hegemony installations like ghosts, exploiting environmental conditions that the aliens couldn't even survive in without full protective gear. On HFY Prime, the capital world's medical facilities were overwhelmed. What had started as minor discomfort was progressing to severe respiratory distress. Hospitals reported that their patients couldn't be treated with conventional methods, and the contamination seemed to be spreading faster than any known pathogen. "It's in the water supply," reported Chief Medical Officer Kralteth to the planetary governor, "and the atmospheric processors and the food distribution network. Whatever this is, it's everywhere. How is that possible?" the governor demanded. "Our biosecurity protocols are the most advanced in the galaxy." Kralteth's patches flickered with uncertainty. "Sir, I don't think this is natural. The contamination patterns are too precise, too coordinated. This appears to be a deliberately engineered biological weapon." The implications hit both of them simultaneously. The humans hadn't scattered in fear. They'd been preparing for war, and they'd just demonstrated that they could strike at the heart of the hegemony without firing a single shot, Commander. HFY received the report while trying to coordinate. A military response to what his intelligence officers still insisted was a minor health crisis. When the full scope of the contamination became clear, his bioluminescent patches went completely dark, a sign of shock in his species. "How many worlds?" he asked quietly. Commander HFY's forearms trembled with rage as he stared at Admiral Winchester's calm face on the communication screen. Around him, his bridge crew struggled to maintain their composure despite the worsening symptoms affecting them all. The human admiral looked completely at ease, as if she were discussing weather rather than the systematic poisoning of an entire galactic empire. "Surrender?" HFY's voice cracked, his translator struggling to render the mix of fury and disbelief in his words. "You dare speak of surrender while hiding behind chemical weapons like cowards?" Admiral Winchester's expression didn't change. "Commander, what we've introduced to your worlds isn't a chemical weapon. It's a biological correction agent. Your species evolved in a specific atmospheric environment that we've simply adjusted. The effects are completely reversible once you release Captain Chen and withdraw your claims to human space. Biological correction agent," repeated Sub-Commander Yithka, his bioluminescent patches flickering erratically. "They're saying they can modify planetary atmospheres at will." The implications were staggering. If humans could alter the basic atmospheric composition of dozens of worlds simultaneously, they possessed technology that could reshape entire star systems. Every species in the galaxy depended on specific environmental conditions to survive. The humans had just demonstrated they could make any world uninhabitable for its native species within days. "You're bluffing," HFY snarled, though his patches had dimmed to almost nothing. "No species possesses such technology." "You're correct," Winchester acknowledged. "No species you've encountered before. But then, none of them evolved on a Class 12 Deathworld." She leaned forward slightly. "Commander, your species developed in paradise compared to Earth. Stable climate, abundant resources, predictable seasons. You've never had to fight your own planet for the right to exist." She gestured to someone off-screen, and the display split to show data streams from across hegemony space. Medical reports, atmospheric readings, contamination spread patterns, all updating in real time. Humans have spent 300,000 years learning to survive in environments that would kill your entire species in minutes. We've endured ice ages, volcanic winters, plague outbreaks, atmospheric disasters, and ecological collapses that would have rendered your homeworld permanently uninhabitable. We're very, very good at biological warfare because we've been fighting biology itself since we first developed consciousness. On HFY Prime, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Governor Kethaval watched through his office windows as emergency medical transports filled the sky. The capital city's hospitals were beyond capacity, and the contamination was affecting basic infrastructure as hegemony workers became too ill to maintain essential systems. "Sir," his aide reported, "the atmospheric processors are starting to malfunction. Without proper maintenance, we could lose life support in the underground habitats within 48 hours. How many citizens are affected?" Current estimates suggest 93% of the planetary population is experiencing symptoms ranging from mild discomfort to severe respiratory distress. "The contamination appears to be accelerating." Kethaval's mandibles clicked nervously. The humans had engineered something that specifically targeted hegemony biology while leaving infrastructure intact. They weren't trying to destroy planets. They were making them uninhabitable for his people while keeping everything else functional. Sir, the aide continued quietly, there's something else. Our intelligence networks are reporting similar outbreaks on every major hegemony world simultaneously. This wasn't random contamination. This was a coordinated assault. Meanwhile, Dr. Morrison was monitoring the biological warfare campaign from his hidden laboratory on Titan. The bacterial cultures were performing exactly as designed, spreading through atmospheric recycling systems and symbiotic biological processes that were integral to hegemony physiology. Stage 3 is initiating ahead of schedule, he reported to Admiral Winchester. Their immune systems are trying to adapt, but the bacterial cultures are designed to evolve faster than their natural resistance can develop. We should see complete atmospheric saturation within 18 hours. Casualties? Winchester asked. 0 deaths so far as intended, but they're approaching the threshold where cognitive function will be seriously impaired. Their military coordination should degrade significantly within the next few hours. This was the crucial moment in human strategy. They weren't trying to commit genocide. They were demonstrating that they could if they chose to. The message was clear. Humanity possessed the ability to make any world uninhabitable, but they were showing restraint. The choice between cooperation and extinction was entirely up to the hegemony. On board the Council flagship, Captain Chen had noticed that his guards were being replaced every few hours now. Each new guard looked worse than the previous one, and security throughout. The ship was becoming noticeably lax as crew members struggled with fatigue and concentration problems. Chen had also been monitoring ship communications through the rudimentary interface in his cell. Emergency messages were flooding in from across hegemony space, and he could see patrol ships returning to base rather than continuing their missions. Whatever his people were doing, it was working. Guard, he called to the latest hegemony soldier stationed outside his cell. You might want to contact your medical officer. That wheezing sound you're making isn't normal. The guard tried to snarl a response but broke into a coughing fit instead. Through the cell's small window, Chen could see the bridge crew moving more slowly. Their normally precise coordination obviously impaired. Commander HFY was discovering that commanding a military fleet became significantly more difficult when half his officers couldn't concentrate for more than a few minutes at a time. Battle plans that should have taken hours to coordinate were taking entire days, and simple communications were being misunderstood or forgotten entirely. Sir, his intelligence officer reported, we've lost contact with 17 outer system bases. The last transmissions mentioned equipment failures and medical emergencies. And our main fleet? Approximately 40% combat effectiveness and declining. Many ships are requesting permission to return to base for emergency medical assistance. HFY stared at the tactical display. Red warning indicators now covered over half his territory, and human ships had begun moving from their hiding positions to surround key hegemony installations. They weren't attacking, just positioning themselves to cut off escape routes and supply lines. They're not trying to defeat us in battle, Sub-Commander Yithka observed, his voice weak and raspy. They're making it impossible for us to fight. The genius of the human strategy was becoming apparent. They had identified the hegemony's greatest strength, their massive military machine, and simply removed their ability to operate it effectively. Without destroying a single ship or killing a single soldier, they had reduced the galaxy's most powerful military to a collection of sick, confused, and increasingly desperate crews. Admiral Winchester's voice crackled through the communication system again. Commander HFY, I'm prepared to offer you terms. Release Captain Chen. Formally withdraw all claims to human space and provide reparations for the assault on our diplomatic representative. In exchange, we'll provide the antidote to restore normal atmospheric conditions throughout your territory. Antidote? HFY croaked. His throat was so constricted now that even speaking was becoming difficult. A simple bacterial culture that will neutralize the organisms we introduced. Your people will begin recovering within hours, and full atmospheric restoration should be complete within a week. However, this offer has a time limit. Every hour you delay, the contamination spreads further and becomes more difficult to reverse. She paused, letting him process that information. Commander, you have 6 hours to decide. After that, the biological agents will reach a concentration where reversal may no longer be possible. The bridge fell silent except for the labored breathing of the crew. Zexhai realized that Winchester wasn't negotiating from a position of strength. She was offering mercy to a defeated enemy, giving him a way to surrender that wouldn't completely destroy his people or his empire. But the alternative was clear. If he refused, the humans had demonstrated they could make every hegemony world uninhabitable. His species would face extinction not through military conquest, but through environmental warfare that they had never imagined possible. "Sir," Yithka wheezed, "perhaps we should consider their terms." Zexhai's bioluminescent patches flickered weakly. For the first time in his career, he was facing an enemy that had outmaneuvered him completely. The humans had turned his empire's greatest strength, its size and complexity, into a vulnerability. They had struck everywhere at once, using weapons that his people couldn't even detect until it was too late. "Get me a direct channel to Admiral Winchester," he said finally, "and prepare a message to Fleet Command. We need to discuss terms." As he spoke, Zexhai couldn't help but wonder what other surprises the humans had prepared. If this was what they could accomplish as a defensive measure, what might they be capable of if they decided to go on the attack? The thought made his remaining bioluminescent patches go completely dark. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos. Representatives from dozens of species packed the great circular chamber, their voices creating a cacophony of fear and confusion as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The hegemony's collapse had sent shockwaves through every corner of civilized space. Chancellor Voxtum struggled to maintain order as species after species demanded answers. The insectoid Keth were chittering frantically about biological warfare. The gas-breathing Altarians had sealed themselves in protective suits. Even the silicon-based crystalline collective, usually immune to organic concerns, were expressing alarm about humanity's demonstrated ability to alter planetary environments. "Order," Voxtum called, his whiskers twitching with stress. "We must approach this crisis methodically." "Crisis?" screeched the Keth representative. "The humans have demonstrated they can poison entire worlds. How do we know we're not next?" Ambassador Liu Wei sat in the human delegation section, watching the proceedings with carefully controlled emotions. She had helped plan Protocol 7, but seeing it in action was still overwhelming. In less than 72 hours, humanity had brought the galaxy's most powerful empire to its knees without firing a single shot. "If I may address the Council," she said. Rising from her seat, the chamber fell silent. Every eye, sensory organ, and detection device focused on the small human woman. Liu Wei was acutely aware that she was probably the most feared person in the galaxy at this moment. "Honored representatives," she began, "I want to clarify something important. The actions my species has taken were purely defensive. Commander Zexhai struck our diplomatic representative during formal proceedings and declared war on humanity. We responded to protect ourselves. By poisoning entire worlds," the Altarian representative gasped through his atmospheric suit. "By temporarily adjusting atmospheric conditions to encourage negotiation," Liu Wei corrected. "No hegemony citizen has died from our actions. The biological agents we introduced caused discomfort and reduced cognitive function. But they are not lethal. We could have chosen far more destructive options." The crystalline collective's representative, a being of living mineral that communicated through harmonic vibrations, rang with deep tones. "You speak of restraint, but you have demonstrated the ability to commit genocide on a galactic scale. How can any species feel safe knowing humans possess such weapons?" Liu Wei was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because," she said finally, "humanity has no interest in conquest or domination. We just want to be left alone to build our new homes in peace. We've offered the hegemony complete atmospheric restoration in exchange for our diplomat and a guarantee of non-aggression. That's not the behavior of a species seeking galactic domination." But even as she spoke, Liu Wei knew the galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. In 3 days, they had gone from being dismissed as primitive Deathworlders to being recognized as the most dangerous species in known space. On Zexhai Prime, the situation had reached critical levels. Governor Kethaval's aide reported that essential services were failing, as too few workers remained functional enough to maintain them. Power grids were becoming unstable, food distribution was breaking down, and the atmospheric processors that maintained breathable air in underground habitats were operating at minimal efficiency. "Sir, we've received word from Commander Zexhai. He's agreed to human terms. Admiral Winchester is transmitting the atmospheric restoration protocols now. Kethaval's relief was so intense that his bioluminescent patches flared despite his illness. How long until the effects reverse? According to human projections, symptomatic improvement should begin within 6 hours. Full atmospheric restoration will take approximately 1 standard week. As the antidote bacteria spread through atmospheric systems across hegemony space, something unprecedented in galactic history was occurring. The most militarily powerful empire was surrendering to a species with 12 ships and a few million citizens. But humanity's victory hadn't come through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had won through superior understanding of biological warfare and environmental manipulation. Dr. Morrison monitored the antidote deployment from his laboratory, ensuring that the restorative bacteria were spreading as predicted. Contamination levels dropping within acceptable parameters, he reported to Admiral Winchester. Hegemony biology should return to normal function within the projected time frame. Any resistance from their immune systems? None significant. We designed the antidote to work with their natural biological processes rather than against them. They should actually feel better than normal once the restoration is complete, since we're optimizing their atmospheric composition slightly. This was another demonstration of human restraint. They weren't just reversing the damage they'd done. They were improving conditions for their former enemies. On board the Council flagship, Captain Chen was finally released from his cell. Commander HFY met him at the detention center. His appearance drastically changed from their first encounter. The alien commander's bioluminescent patches were dim and flickering, his movement slow and labored. "Captain Chen," HFY said, his voice barely above a whisper through his translator. "I formally apologize for my actions during diplomatic proceedings. The hegemony withdraws all claims to human space and offers reparations for the assault on your person." Chen studied the defeated commander for a moment. HFY had been brought low, but Chen felt no satisfaction in seeing his enemy reduced to this state. "Apology accepted, Commander. I hope our species can build a better relationship going forward." "Your people," HFY said quietly. "They could have destroyed us completely." "Why didn't they?" Chen considered the question. "Because that's not who we are. Humans are dangerous when threatened, but we're not monsters. We fight to protect what we love, not to destroy what we hate." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other species were rapidly reassessing their relationship with humanity. Trade representatives who had dismissed human goods as primitive curiosities were suddenly requesting urgent meetings. Military planners were studying human tactics and wondering how to defend against an enemy that could strike through their life support systems. The Vegan Confederacy's Military Analysis Division was working around the clock to understand what had just happened. General Thexmore stood before a holographic display showing the timeline of human actions. "They planned this for years," he observed to his staff. "Every human colony was positioned to support this operation. Every trade agreement included elements that would help them map our biological and technological dependencies. They've been preparing for war since the day they joined galactic civilization. Should we consider them a threat to our own security?" asked his intelligence chief. Thexmore's whiskers twitched thoughtfully. "They've demonstrated they could be a threat to anyone they choose, but their targets were specifically related to hegemony aggression against human space. They haven't made any moves against other species, even ones who have been less than welcoming." The economic implications were equally staggering. Human knowledge of biological warfare and environmental manipulation was suddenly the most valuable commodity in the galaxy. Species that had previously dismissed Earth's scientific contributions were now desperately interested in human biotechnology and atmospheric engineering. Dr. Patricia Huang, Earth's leading atmospheric engineer, found herself fielding desperate requests for consultation from dozens of worlds. Species wanted to know if their own worlds could be defended against the kind of attack humanity had launched against the hegemony. "The scary thing," she explained to Admiral Winchester during a secure briefing, "is that what we did to the hegemony was relatively crude. We targeted one specific biological pathway that was unique to their species. If we wanted to, we could develop agents that would affect multiple species simultaneously, or create cascading environmental failures that would take decades to repair. Let's hope we never have to," Winchester replied grimly, but the galaxy now knew that humans possessed weapons that made traditional military force almost irrelevant. A single human ship could carry enough biological agents to cripple entire star systems. Human infiltration teams could plant environmental weapons that would activate months or years after deployment. Captain Torres, monitoring galactic communications from her position near Altair, reported increasing chatter about the human threat. Some species were calling for preemptive action against humanity before they could become even more dangerous. Others were requesting alliance treaties, hoping to ensure they would never become targets. "We've changed everything," Torres observed during the daily command conference. "Win or lose, the galaxy will never see warfare the same way again." Admiral Winchester nodded grimly. "The question now is whether we've made ourselves safer or painted a target on our backs that will never disappear." As hegemony citizens began to recover and normal atmospheric conditions were restored across their territory, one thing became clear to every observer. Humanity had announced itself as a galactic superpower in the MU. 6 months after what historians would later call the slap heard across the galaxy, the geopolitical landscape of known space had transformed completely. Admiral Winchester stood in the newly constructed human embassy on the neutral world of Nexus Station, watching through reinforced windows as representatives from 47 different species waited in carefully organized lines to meet with human diplomats. "Strange how perspective changes, isn't it?" Captain Chen observed, joining her at the window. His face still bore a faint scar from Zexai's strike, but he wore it with quiet pride. That scar had become a symbol throughout human space, proof that humanity would not be intimidated no matter the odds. 6 months ago, half these species wouldn't return our calls, Winchester replied. Now they're offering us tribute just to guarantee we won't consider them hostile. The transformation had been swift and dramatic. The Altarian Confederacy had been the first to request a formal non-aggression pact, offering substantial trade concessions and technology exchanges. The Crystalline Collective had followed within days, despite their usual isolation from organic politics. Even the proud Vegan military had quietly approached human representatives about mutual defense consultations. But perhaps the most significant change was happening within the hegemony itself. Commander Zexai, rather than being court-martialed for his defeat, had been promoted to senior strategic advisor. His new role involved studying human tactics and developing policies to prevent future conflicts with species that might possess similar capabilities. "Admiral Winchester," came a voice through the embassy's communication system. "The Keth delegation is requesting an urgent meeting. They're reporting another incident." Winchester sighed. The incidents had been occurring regularly since word of humanity's biological warfare capabilities had spread throughout the galaxy. Species that had been oppressing their neighbors for centuries were suddenly finding themselves facing rebellions, armed with what appeared to be human-inspired environmental weapons. Which system this time? The Rigel sector. The Keth mining colonies are reporting atmospheric contamination that specifically affects their species. The local slave populations appear to be immune. Chen raised an eyebrow. "Sounds familiar." "Too familiar," Winchester agreed. "Send our standard response." Humanity had nothing to do with this incident. If they want our help investigating, they'll need to address their labor practices first. This had become a pattern. Oppressive regimes throughout the galaxy were discovering that their subject populations had somehow acquired knowledge of species-specific biological warfare. Officially, humanity denied any involvement. Unofficially, Dr. Morrison had been very busy over the past 6 months. And human trade vessels had made stops at many worlds where minority populations were being mistreated. The revolution was spreading, and humanity didn't need to fire a single shot or deploy a single weapon. They just had to share knowledge with people who were already motivated to use it. On Earth's rebuilt capital, President Sarah Chen, a distant cousin of the captain, was reviewing reports that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Humanity's population had grown from 8 billion refugees to nearly 12 billion, as other species began requesting permission to immigrate to human space. "Madam President," her aide reported, "we have another application for protected status. This time it's a group of hegemony scientists who fear retaliation for their work on atmospheric warfare countermeasures." "Approved," Chen said without hesitation. "Set them up in the new Geneva research facility. Their expertise might be useful if we ever face a species with similar capabilities to our own." The immigration requests weren't random. Word had spread that human space was becoming the galaxy's primary refuge for scientists, artists, political dissidents, and anyone else who feared persecution. Humanity's demonstrated ability to protect itself had made them the de facto guardians of galactic freedom. But with power came responsibility, and that responsibility was weighing heavily on human leadership. "Madam President," her military advisor reported, "we've confirmed another 12 worlds have requested human protection status. That brings the total to over 200 systems that want our guarantee of protection from aggressive neighbors." President Chen studied the galactic map on her office wall. Red indicators showed human space, which had expanded from 7 systems to 43, as they accepted refugee populations and established protective agreements. Yellow indicators showed allied systems under human protection. Blue showed neutral territories. What worried her was how little green remained on the map. Systems that were truly independent and not connected to humanity's growing sphere of influence were becoming an empire whether we want to or not, she observed. Meanwhile, on Zexai Prime, the former hegemony commander was briefing his government's new leadership on humanity's continued activities. The biological warfare attack had triggered massive political upheaval within the hegemony, and the species that had once ruled through military might was now governed by a council focused on diplomatic solutions. Their expansion isn't through conquest, Zexai explained to the assembled leaders. They're accepting refugees and offering protection to threatened populations. But the result is the same. Human influence is spreading throughout the galaxy. "Are they a threat to us?" asked Councillor Yithka, Zexai's former subordinate who now held a senior political position. "Not directly. They've honored every agreement made during our surrender. Atmospheric conditions were fully restored, and they've even provided improvements to our environmental systems. But they're changing the fundamental balance of galactic power." Zexai activated a holographic display, showing human activity over the past 6 months. "Look at the pattern. Every world they've accepted for protection has been under threat from a more powerful neighbor. Every refugee population they've relocated had been facing persecution or environmental disasters. They're not conquering. They're collecting the displaced and the threatened. To what end?" "That's what concerns me," Zexai admitted. "Either they genuinely believe in protecting the innocent, which would make them the most altruistic species in galactic history, or they're building the largest military coalition ever assembled by convincing others that they need human protection." The truth was probably somewhere in between. Dr. Morrison's private communications with Admiral Winchester revealed the deeper strategy. Every species we protect becomes a source of new biological and technological information, he explained during a secure briefing. The refugee scientists are sharing knowledge about their homeworld ecosystems, their species' biological vulnerabilities, and their former government's military capabilities. "We're not just growing our territory, we're growing our understanding of how to fight every major species in the galaxy." But humanity was also changing in unexpected ways. The constant influx of alien refugees and scientists was exposing humans to new ideas, new technologies, and new ways of thinking. Human children were growing up speaking multiple alien languages, learning alien sciences, and developing hybrid philosophical systems that combined human pragmatism with alien wisdom. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, now heading humanity's Galactic Intelligence Division, reported social changes that surprised even human leadership. "Our culture is evolving faster than any human society in recorded history. We have human Altarian engineering teams developing atmospheric processors that work on any world type. Human crystalline research groups are creating new materials that we couldn't imagine a year ago. And human Kith agricultural specialists are solving food production problems that plagued their homeworlds for centuries." "Are we still human?" Admiral Winchester asked during a private moment with Captain Chen. Chen considered the question, while watching a group of human children playing with young Altarians in the embassy's garden area. The human kids were breathing auxiliary atmosphere to accommodate their alien playmates, something that would have been impossible before alien medical technology improved human respiratory systems. "I think we're becoming something new," he said finally. "Still human at our core, but influenced by every species that's chosen to trust us with their survival." This evolution wasn't limited to technology and culture. Human military doctrine was incorporating alien strategies and tactics. Human diplomacy was adopting communication methods that worked better with non-human psychology. Even human art was changing as alien aesthetic concepts influenced human creative expression. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical. Humanity had spent its entire evolution fighting for survival on a hostile world. Now they found themselves in the role of protector for dozens of other species, many of whom had never experienced the kind of environmental pressures that shaped human development. "We're becoming the galaxy's immune system," observed Dr. Patricia Huang during a scientific conference on environmental warfare defense. "When a system comes under attack, we respond to neutralize the threat. But unlike a biological immune system, we're also trying to understand and reform the attackers rather than simply destroying them." The hegemony had been transformed. 2 years after the slap that changed everything, Admiral Winchester stood in the center of what was once called the Galactic Council Chamber and was now known as the Assembly of Free Worlds. The circular chamber had been expanded 3 times to accommodate representatives from over 300 species, most of whom owed their freedom to human intervention or protection. She wasn't alone at the center podium. Beside her stood former Commander Sci-Fi, now serving as the hegemony's ambassador of reconciliation, and Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had evolved from colonial administrator to humanity's first galactic coordinator. Together, they represented something unprecedented in galactic history: former enemies working together to solve problems that affected all species. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished beings," Winchester began, her words automatically translated into hundreds of languages and communication methods. "We gather today to address the Andromeda crisis." A holographic display filled the center of the chamber, showing long-range sensor data from the galactic rim. Massive ships of unknown design were crossing the void between galaxies, heading directly for inhabited space. Early estimates suggested a fleet larger than anything the Milky Way had ever assembled. "Our combined intelligence networks have confirmed that these vessels originated in the Andromeda galaxy," Dr. Vasquez continued. "They appear to be fleeing some catastrophic event, but their approach vector suggests they view our galaxy as a potential new territory, rather than seeking refuge." The chamber erupted in concerned voices from dozens of species. Humanity had brought peace to most of their galaxy, but they'd never faced a threat from outside it entirely. Sci-Fi activated his section of the presentation. "Based on their approach pattern and energy signatures, these vessels are likely carrying populations in the billions. If they intend conquest rather than coexistence, we face a challenge unlike anything in recorded history." This was the test that human leadership had been preparing for since their rise to galactic prominence. For 2 years they had proven that they could defeat aggressive neighbors and protect vulnerable populations. But the approaching Andromedan fleet represented a threat that might require everything humanity had learned about warfare: diplomacy and biological manipulation. Captain Chen, now Admiral Chen and commander of the Terran Defense Fleet, reviewed the strategic situation from the bridge of the UES Prometheus II, humanity's first purpose-built flagship. The vessel combined human engineering with technology from dozens of allied species, creating something that was both recognizably human and uniquely galactic. Status report he requested from his mixed species bridge. "Crew, long-range sensors confirm approximately 2,000 vessels of various sizes," reported Lieutenant Commander Cathara, a former hegemony officer who had requested transfer to human service. "ETA to outer system perimeters is 18 months at their current velocity. Defensive preparations? All member worlds of the Assembly are implementing Protocol 12, answered Dr. Morrison, now serving as Director of Galactic Defense Research. Atmospheric modification systems are being prepared for rapid deployment, and biological defense networks are being established throughout inhabited space. Protocol 12 was humanity's contribution to galactic defense, a coordinated system that could rapidly modify planetary environments to make them uninhabitable to invading species while protecting native populations. It was the ultimate evolution of the biological warfare techniques they'd developed to defeat the hegemony. But Admiral Winchester was hoping they wouldn't need to use it. In her private quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel UES Harmony, she was reviewing data that gave her a different perspective on the approaching crisis. "Computer, analyze Andromedan energy signatures and compare with known galactic technologies. The artificial intelligence and advanced fusion of human computing and crystalline collective processing methods responded immediately. Analysis complete. Andromedan vessel energy patterns suggest significant technological degradation and resource depletion. Recommendation: consider peaceful contact before assuming hostile intent. This was why Winchester had requested this assignment. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their ability to wage biological warfare or manipulate planetary environments. It was their talent for finding alternatives to conflict, for seeing potential allies where others saw only enemies. Send a message to Admiral Chen. I'm requesting permission to lead a first contact mission. On Earth, President Chen, who had been re-elected twice as humanity adapted to its role as galactic leadership, was hosting an emergency meeting of the Human Strategic Council. The room contained representatives from every major human settlement, along with advisory positions held by aliens who had become so integrated into human society that they were essentially honorary humans. The approaching fleet represents both our greatest challenge and our greatest opportunity, she explained to the assembled leaders. If we handle this correctly, we could expand our protective umbrella to include refugees from an entire galaxy. If we handle it incorrectly, we could face a war that makes our conflict with the hegemony look like a minor diplomatic incident. Dr. Liu Wei, now serving as humanity's senior diplomatic advisor, presented the cultural analysis her team had prepared. Based on ship configurations and energy usage patterns, the Andromedan civilization appears to be nomadic, possibly fleeing environmental catastrophe in their home galaxy. This suggests they may be more interested in finding new homes than in conquering existing populations. And if they're not interested in coexistence? Asked Admiral Torres, now commander of human military forces. Then we demonstrate why 8 billion humans with 300 allied species is something that even a galactic migration fleet might want to negotiate with rather than fight. President Chen replied grimly. The next 18 months became a period of unprecedented cooperation and preparation throughout the galaxy. Species that had been enemies for centuries worked together to establish defensive networks. Planets that had never cooperated began sharing resources and technology. The approaching Andromedan threat had created exactly what humanity had hoped for: a unified galactic civilization focused on mutual protection rather than territorial expansion. But humanity's greatest contribution wasn't military preparation or biological warfare systems. It was the establishment of the contact protocol, a systematic approach to first contact that prioritized communication and understanding over defensive positioning. Admiral Winchester led the contact fleet personally, taking 12 ships representing every major galactic civilization to meet the Andromedan fleet at the edge of inhabited space. The vessels included human atmospheric manipulation technology, hegemony military systems, crystalline communication networks, and Altarian environmental adaptation equipment. Andromedan vessels. This is Admiral Sarah Winchester of the Terran Defense Fleet, representing the Assembly of Free Worlds. She transmitted as her fleet approached the massive alien ships. We come in peace, seeking to understand your needs and intentions. The response came in a burst of mathematical concepts and energy patterns that the combined translation systems struggled to interpret. But slowly, meaning began to emerge. Greetings, local inhabitants, the message conveyed. We are the Andromedan Archive Fleet, preserving the survivors of our galaxy's core collapse. We seek sanctuary and mutual benefit, not conquest of your territories. The first meeting between representatives of two galaxies took place aboard Winchester's flagship, in a conference room that had been hastily modified to accommodate beings who breathed methane and communicated through bioluminescent displays. The Andromedan representative was unlike anything in Milky Way records, a collective intelligence distributed among dozens of individual organisms, each contributing to a group consciousness that spanned light years. Your galaxy shows signs of recent unification, the collective observed through its translation matrix. This is unexpected. Most galaxies remain fragmented until external pressure forces cooperation. Winchester smiled. We had excellent motivation. A small species from a dangerous world taught us that survival requires adaptation and cooperation rather than domination. You speak of humans, the collective stated. Our sensors detected the biological warfare signatures from your conflict with the military hegemony. Impressive adaptation of evolutionary pressure techniques to interstellar warfare. You know about humans? Dr. Vasquez asked, surprised. Humans are known throughout several galaxies. Your species' unique combination of environmental adaptation and cooperative expansion has been observed by multiple galactic monitoring networks. You are considered a positive evolutionary development. The revelation was staggering. Humanity's rise to galactic prominence wasn't unique. It was part of a larger pattern that occurred across multiple galaxies, where species from hostile environments eventually became the catalyst for galactic unification and peaceful expansion. Over the following months, as Andromedan refugee populations were integrated into existing world,